WFP is aware that we needed to forge strategic alliances with those who have the expertise, and we were very lucky actually to establish that strategic partnership with IDS. This program is all about using the countries where we operate as the center of gravity to promote what we say we would do. That is, taking into account the different needs of men, women, girls and boys, and promoting equal opportunities. And to do that, we needed to better understand those dynamics, those dimensions in the countries. So this program is helping us really through a very participative approach to learn from what is happening. So we have good practices, we also have challenges, and this program is helping us to really, through a very creative, innovative way, to really put the country at the center of this understanding. This could serve as a lesson not only for the country, but within the region, and inform a better strategic and operational way of assisting the people we serve.
Empowerment of women is not only necessary, but it's really critical if we want to achieve our goals of fighting poverty, our goals of reducing malnutrition. So this project is very important. It's about gender, it's about helping us to mainstream gender issues, talking about parity, very fundamental, very important.
We've achieved a lot, and I think that perhaps when we started there were very high expectations that we would have all these massive impacts and that everyone would start kind of integrating gender in this really kind of systematic way, and that we'd have all these amazing findings. I do think we've got some amazing stuff, but it hasn't necessarily materialised in that way. So for me, it's the kind of small changes, like the incremental changes. It's changes in the people that we've worked with directly who've been really, really inspired. I'm not exaggerating. It's like their eyes have been opened through this process because they've been given the opportunity to step back and think about their own work, but also what gender means.
By going to the field, we are going to meet directly with our counterparts, with the beneficiaries, and the results would be clear, and that's where sustainability also gets involved, participatory element involving the communities.
WFP, even though you've got this head office in Rome and you've got regional offices, it's actually very decentralised. So every country is a kind of law unto itself. So each country does an assessment of the issues there. They decide how to respond. There are certain WFP programmes that they have to roll out, and they decide who they're going to work with, how they're going to do it, what's the priority. So that's one of the challenges, is sort of that there's no country that's alike, but also each country is dealing with very, very specific issues and very different contexts as well. For example, you've got a lot of humanitarian contexts where they're very responsive and you never quite know what's going to happen. You've got other countries where you start with great ambitions, you start rolling out these big programs like Senegal, and then suddenly Ebola happens, all the money gets diverted elsewhere, there's a massive restructure. So you never know what's going to happen. There are famines, you know, there are wars, there are all of these things that happen that are constantly there. So WFP is a very operational organisation as opposed to a lot of other UN organisations, so it's dealing with this on a daily basis. The other thing which has been a challenge, I guess, for this programme is that there are different personalities, there are different people who are managing the programmes. So some of them are very sympathetic to the gender issues and place high priority on that, others not necessarily. Then the other issue is you could have somebody there who's very sympathetic and working with you in a really effective way, and then they move. So there's a lot of organisational movement where you're working with staff who are very committed, you know, completely on the same page as you, and then they get moved somewhere else or they decide to move. So all of this creates quite a sort of fluid situation which I think has been a major challenge for us. But it's the way that WFP works, so that's the reality, and we just need to deal with it, really.
One of the main reflections that I've had on what the staff themselves took away from our process was actually having the space and time to come together to reflect on gender equality and gender equity within the work that they're doing. Creating a space, which we did in the Participatory Action Learning workshop, to have people from different parts of the organisation, different professional areas, from administrative and support services to programming to operations, as well as senior management and leadership, to come together with partners, local organisations who are implementing the programming that WFP is doing, and to actually just talk to each other about what we do, why we do it, what are our goals, and how does gender come into that? What do we mean by gender equality? How is that informed by our different starting points and positions as men, as women, as coming from different parts of the country or being international staff? And how does that inform what we do and why we do it? So ultimately, even just creating the space to have that conversation in and of itself, I think, was really valuable. And the methodology that we used to do that was actually one of the things that people fed back from the workshop itself as being really valuable for what they could take away from that experience, and seeing how they can create new spaces in their own work to have that process of reflection. And importantly, how those spaces can be created at ground level with the communities and affected populations that the World Food Programme works with, and how can the experience that the staff went through in the workshop we held be recreated in those contexts to ensure that the people that WFP is working to serve have the opportunity to meaningfully raise their voice, raise their concerns, and articulate their ideas about how change should happen through World Food Programme interventions.
One of the big challenges facing the WFP in Lesotho is traditionally food and nutrition is seen as women's responsibility, and the WFP tends to work directly with women. They tend to be the people they see as their beneficiaries. But I think they've increasingly recognised that's a problem, and that you do have to get men on board. Men do have to take responsibility for the nutrition of their families, and also that they miss men by doing that. You know, there are lots of men who might be living on their own and are not being targeted. So they recognise they need to get men more involved, but they're finding it really challenging because of the traditional stereotypes that exist in WFP. So that was a big problem for them.
So we've had workshops with the participation of staff from across actually the programmes and from administration and all parts of the organisation. And those kind of 2-day workshops, the feedback we've had at the end of those workshops has been overwhelmingly positive. A lot of that feedback is along the lines of, it's just so great to have the time and space to sit and reflect.
The staff have had a real opportunity through this programme to challenge themselves on the way that they think about gender and the way that they apply their analysis of gender into their programmes. So they've moved from a starting point that has been traditionally about looking at gender issues and then saying this is how we approach them in our programming, to starting from the ground up and understanding the perspectives of people living in communities and the contextual relevance of gender issues in their lives, and to challenge the assumptions that WFP programming and approaches may hold, to say actually maybe we need to do something differently as an organisation, and that WFP then can think about the work that they're doing on the ground.
One of the real big problems in development over and over again is you see the same mistakes made over and over again. You know, we've been doing this for 60 years, and one of the things I find frustrating as an academic is that we're very good here at pointing out problems, but then those problems get kind of made again and again and again in practice, because you often get people kind of trying to reinvent the wheel. And I think if we spent more time stopping and thinking about things and make a bit more time planning than we do on implementing, I think we probably would make less mistakes and we'd probably be better at learning and innovating. So I actually think, even though it's definitely low on people's priorities when they're in these day-to-day management. It's just, oh, another workshop, that's a waste of time. I actually think if you're focusing on planning and learning, they're actually really valuable because you save mistakes further down the line. There was a Food for Assets programme where they tried to combine giving out food in exchange for community members building assets, and in particular they were looking at sort of combating deforestation, so planting trees. And I think they'd recognised that when they'd done this the first time around, they hadn't really taken any gender kind of perspective into account. So they didn't think about where it was, they didn't think about, in terms of safety for women getting there and back, they didn't think about whether they needed to provide childcare. So when women go to work, planting the trees, who's looking after their children. In some cases they were giving cash, not food, and they weren't thinking about the fact that the women were having to take a whole day out of their time to go to the bank to pick up the cash, and that's a whole day out of their time. So the next time they kind of had their second tranche of funding, partly because of the workshop we'd run with them and where we'd thought about these things and discussed them, they invited my counterpart that I've been working with WFP to help design this new project, to try and think about those things. So in the new project they did have childcare available on site. They made sure that the sites were always within a sort of reasonable walking distance of the villages. They had a dedicated teller in the bank so that it reduced the waiting times in the bank. So they thought about these things. So I think that was an example of where they'd learnt from their lessons the first time around, and they tried to make improvements the second time around.
It's a traditional African setup where women have domestic responsibilities. Women are also in the workplace. In fact, there's a new government in Benin. It's only about 3 women in the cabinet. So there's participation of women in the economy as well. But we are hoping that within our projects, which are really more of social protection, social safety nets, that we have more involvement of women. The more evidence shows that the more women are involved, the better results, the more we are able to reach our goals. Prevention is actually the key. Not wait until the child is malnourished. And then also in the schools, working with the women, we make sure that there is participation of women, interventions that might discourage women, identified things like providing latrines. We provide latrines for boys and girls, uniform, also trying to reduce dropout of girls in the schools. These are all interventions that can really help us to have gender parity and equal participation of women.
We've scratched the surface. I mean, the thing about World Food Programme is it's huge. There are 99 countries that they're in. And I think the risk really is that this will just become confined to the few countries that we've worked in. And our aspiration really is for this to be a kind of movement that goes throughout World Food Programme and really has an impact for the whole organisation. So there's a kind of ripple effect, and there's that people feel inspired by what they're seeing happening in the countries, and they want to do similar things, and they want to take up some of these processes. And we want to see some of these processes embedded in the way that WFP works as well, so that when they're doing their evaluations, they're not just collecting high-level survey data, they're actually talking to people and getting the stories and making that part of their evaluations. The last part of this phase will be about reaching out, so external facing, talking to other UN agencies, talking through our experiences. And yeah, we feel that we've got a really good approach to organisational learning around gender mainstreaming that's very simple but effective, and it's made a difference.
When we involve the communities, it becomes more sustainable, and then the program benefits are more longer lasting. That's the whole idea of this project, mainstreaming with a participatory action learning element.
Well, we hope that this program is the spark that will ignite the barrel, right? It's about making sure that those countries who have accepted to join this initiative really are role models. They show how this has changed, bring about the change they wanted to see in their programs. And we hope that will inspire others. We had already very promising results during the first phase. This has been also inspiring other countries who joined during the second phase. We really think that they could, through peer learning, is very important that the learning is deeply rooted in where action is happening. In our country office, they're able to establish those bridges to talk together.